In my opinion, September is one of the toughest months in the entire year to go out and catch a bass. Whether you fish lakes, rivers, or ponds, September can be an extremely tough month, but it is still possible. You can still have some good fishing in September. And today I want to talk about the top 5 baits to use in the month of September. So stay tuned. It's going to be a good one. This video is brought to you by Sportsman'sOutfitters.com. Right now, Sportsman's Outfitters, they are having a huge Labor Day sale. You can save a ton of money on tackle right now. And my personal favorite deal is if you buy an Arc Lancer Pro Series rod, you can actually get a second for just $19. That's a $100 rod for just 19 bucks. So if you guys are on the market for some rods, right now is the time to buy, and you can greatly help support the Bass Fishing HQ channel. Now, before we get into the top 5 lures, I just want to talk about the month of September real quick, because the month of September is a transition month in bass fishing. You see a lot of bass that are going from kind of their late summertime patterns and starting to get into some of their early fall patterns. And that transition is probably the most difficult transition throughout the entire year. Now, another thing that can happen in September is you have what you call a lake turnover. And I did a full video on this, but this is when basically the top layer of water mixes with the bottom layer of water. And when they mix, it really depletes a lot of oxygen in the water, which really makes those fish stop biting. Now, add in the fact that these fish have been extremely pressured for months and months, and there's a ton of bait in the water because of all the young of the year bait fish that are everywhere now. This makes September very, very difficult. Now, with all that being said, let's jump into the 5 top baits for September bass fishing. Now, the first lure or technique that I will highly recommend in September is a drop shot of some sort. And I really like the robo worms most of the time when I am drop shot fishing. I like that straight tail finesse worm because it just gets me a lot of bites. Now, I will fish a drop shot no matter the body of water that I'm fishing. Actually, last year I did a video where I bank fished with a drop shot in September. We caught a lot of fish. This was a very difficult pond to fish at the time, but we still caught some, and we caught them all on a drop shot. Now, when it comes to lake fishing, I also like fishing that drop shot, but the big thing that I have found when it comes to fishing a drop shot late in the year is that you typically want a really long leader. And the reason that you want a long leader is because a lot of fish just tend to rise off the bottom. They tend to suspend kind of in the month of September. And so having a really long drop shot leader, I'm talking about something that is 2.5, even 3 foot, can really make a huge difference into actually catching fish and not. I've actually dropped a camera down on fish before, and I simply see a lot of fish during this month that are off the bottom, 2.5, 3, 4 foot off the bottom, and those fish don't always like to go down to get a bait. So if you bring that bait to their level on your drop shot, I am telling you what, it can make a huge difference on the number of bites that you will get. So anytime I am fishing, no matter the body of water in September, I'm always gonna have a drop shot rigged up. Now, one of my personal favorite ways to catch fish in the month of September is actually with a big rod and reel and a big punch rig. Now, like I just talked about, a lot of times in September, you're going to have that turnover, which depletes a lot of oxygen. Now, if you focus on areas that have a lot of thicker vegetation, that thick vegetation is always going to be producing oxygen through photosynthesis. So there's typically always a population of bass that stays in the grass year round. And in September, across the country, this is one of the best months where you typically have a lot of really heavy grass mats. They sometimes get so heavy that you can't even fish a frog across these mats because the bass literally can't come through it. For them, it's literally like hitting a brick wall. I remember fishing eelgrass mats up on Lake Oneida in New York that you could not fish a frog across them because the bass couldn't come through that. You had to pick up a punch stick and actually get through that mat to where the bass are. So anytime that I am fishing a lake or a body of water where you have really thick mats, I always have a punch stick ready to go to be able to get to those fish that are under those mats. Now, when it comes to punching, I really like 1.25 ounces to 1.5 ounces weight. It's a very heavy weight, but I also like a very small creature bait. This is a Zoom speed crawl. It's one of my favorite baits to punch with because it's very small, but it still has action as it falls through that mat. Now, this is a technique that will catch you really big bass. You may not get a ton of bites throughout the day, but the ones that you get typically are a little bit bigger. Now, moving on to bait number 3. If you guys know me, you know that I love topwater. I love it. There's just something about it that is just in my soul. I love topwater fishing, and I pick up a Spook style bait a lot during this month. What you see in September is you still see a lot of schooling activity. Now, real specifically, this is the bait that I really like to throw in the month of September. This is an Evergreen JT. Now, this is the 95. I also throw it in the 115. But the thing that I like about this specific bait is that there are no rattles in it. If you listen to it, there's no sound. It is completely silent. And so anytime you are fishing heavily pressured bodies of water or really still conditions, that silent bait is going to outproduce those really loud clacky baits. I'm actually going to make a video on this specific bait in the very near future. So if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Now, the biggest thing with topwater fishing during this month is simply covering a ton of water. You are not always going to find a solid pattern during September. You know, I might throw this up next to a dock and catch a bass, or I might throw it down a grass line and catch a bass, or I might throw it on a brush pile that's in 8 foot of water and a bass will actually come up out of that brush pile to get that fish. That is what you see a lot during this month with a topwater bite. You just have to simply cover a ton of water. You're going to catch one fish here and one fish there. Sure, you might run into some schooling fish, and if you can absolutely get your bait on top of that schooling fish when they're like actively busting on that bait, that's typically when you can catch fish. But for the most part, when I'm fishing topwaters during this time of the year, I know that I'm going to be getting a fish bite here and a fish bite there and a fish bite over here. It's not really consistent, but you again tend to catch a little bit bigger than average fish with a topwater during September. Now, lure number 4, I think may come as a shock to some of you guys because this is probably not a lure that a lot of guys pick up in the month of September, but it's also a very classic bait. It's one that we all know, and that is a spinnerbait. During the month of September is when I always start fishing a spinnerbait, and I will fish it all the way to the end of the year. I've caught fish on spinnerbaits in really cold water. I mean, water that is in the mid 40s. So usually during this time of the year though, the bass are really focused on bait fish, and to show a little school of bait fish sometime, a spinnerbait can actually do the trick even when a topwater won't get bit. I actually just made a video recently all about burning a spinnerbait, and I actually had several comments on that video of guys that said, dude, you are so true about this because I was fishing a topwater today, I switched over to a spinnerbait and started catching fish. It's just that bass really start liking that blade size. That blade size profile is the exact same size as the bait fish that they are eating. So that spinnerbait, although a lot of times we think about spinnerbaits during the winter or early spring, a spinnerbait will really start to produce in September. And again, I'm gonna throw this until the very end of the year. Now, probably the biggest thing that you should know when it comes to fishing a spinnerbait is really all about blade configuration. And a lot of times I am going to choose different blades depending on the water clarity that I'm dealing with. A lot of times when I fish really clear water situations, I wanna burn this bait. I'm gonna keep it right below the surface of the water, and I'm gonna use these willow blades like this. Now, sometimes in that month of September, you will actually find a better concentration of bass way up creeks and rivers. And I like to throw a spinnerbait in a lot of those situations too. But when you're up these creeks and these rivers, you're typically dealing with dirtier water, more off-color water. And in those situations, I'm gonna lean more on a Colorado or an Indiana blade, something that puts off a little bit more thump and can really help the bass to find it in that off-color water. Now, just a little sneaky side note when it comes to spinnerbait fishing, especially in the month month of September. If you guys haven't thrown this little spinnerbait right here, this is called a rocket shad. It's made by Strike King. I actually grew up fishing this little spinnerbait, and I still catch a lot of fish on this guy right here. And I do the exact same thing with it. I'm gonna cast it out, I'm gonna burn it just below the surface, and this will get bit at times when nothing else will. So don't forget to pick up that spinnerbait in September. Alrighty, we have made it down to the 5th and final lure, and this is one that is one of my favorites. If I can get on this bite, it just makes me so happy. And kind of like the spinnerbait, this is a lure that I will pick up usually in September, but I will fish it through October, through November, as that water temperature starts getting really cool. And this is a great way to catch a big bass. And guess what? It's another topwater lure, and that is the Whopper Plopper style lure. This right here is actually a Berkeley Chopo. Now, if you guys want to know a little bit more about a Whopper Plopper or that Chopo style bait, I made a full video right here that really kind of goes into a lot of mistakes that anglers make with this style of bait. So if you guys enjoyed this video, I think you'll like this one as well. Please comment below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.